this is a process that we're going to continue to innovate, we're going to continue to improve. We don't do something once and consider it done and wait for 3 years for the next iteration. You might not know this, but I've been working with some of your team at Visa as they're reinventing their corporate university space, and specifically in the way that that Visa engages developers who are building fintech solutions. And we used a lot of these processes, a lot of these approaches, including creating personas with your team. It was really a lot of fun to do. So you got great people on your team. Your last sort of row in your chart here is, I think, on sort of organizational model, and you say moving from sort of discrete to integral approach.
Yeah.
Can you explain that shift for us?
Yeah, and I think it's about, I think we have the opportunity to demonstrate new layers of value, because in the future, humans are always going to be a part of this, and there's always going to be a delta. We know that increased number of deltas between what I knew today and how I perform today versus what I need to do. There's an increasing need and demand for us to have a seat at the table. And so I think the shift from looking at it as a transactional problem-solution relationship to saying, how do you get a seat at the table? I used the example the other day of thinking in a parallel to the supply chain management evolution. Back in the day where it used to be a practice of thinking about where your warehouses were and trucks from point A to point B. And now it is a much more technology philosophy integrated, that it is core to the way in which a business gets itself done, especially in the product space. When a toothpaste gets pulled off of a shelf, I've got it hitting the truck and it's loading out and it's going on to the next one. And it's not even just, it's table stakes to survive now. I think in the future, our roles will be, whatever we're going, where we need to be, we will be table stakes for success. It will be a competitive advantage when you get a human enablement system, because that's where we're at. And so when I look at that as more holistically, more integrated, less as an add-on or, a cost center that reduced risks because I got to have compliance.
Yeah.
So
this echoes a little bit with a lot of discussion around learning in the flow of work, for example. You learn in order to change a behavior or create a new capability, and that capability is not discrete from the systems that support it and the activity that goes on around it. So I see that maybe in the future our L&D teams will be deeply embedded into other parts of the organization and not separate and discrete. I'm seeing some experiments around that as well.
I think one of the best compliments I ever received, and I am a classically trained instructional designer, going back to the recovery, and then I was working with a business partner and said, I forgot you were an instructional designer.
Thank you.
And it was the biggest badge I ever had, because to them that was a compliment, and it was like, you've delivered value in ways that I had boxed you into. And I think that's, when I hear you say things like we look to see them embedded, I think that would be the best case. They're in the flow of work. We understand how we're adding value, that connection between the mission, the people, the tools to support them. I think it's just, right now I have so much opportunity in front of us.
Let's talk a little bit about, as a sort of towards the end of our discussion here, about something that really intrigued me that I've heard about before, actually, and that is in GP Strategies, your innovation kitchen. What is the innovation kitchen, and what's your role in making that happen?
So the Innovation Kitchen, we've had it probably for a little over two years now, and how we did it. And it was actually an answer for us with all this disruption and all the, a rise of new platforms and new technologies. The clients constantly asking us, like, what do you know about this? Or bring me something innovative. So what we wanted to do was start to put a framework around what is innovation, what's a structure for repeatable, sustainable innovation, and how do we actually wrap evidence-based practices around it, moving away from opinion, like I don't like, to, what do we see from the efficacy of these platforms? Where do they seem to work? So internally at GP, it's a set-aside space, moved away from the point of execution.
Is it a physical space?
We actually do have a physical space.
Yep.
So we have a physical space. Actually, it's in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yep.
And then we have what I think are some portable things where we can take with clients and they can try things out. So we've got the portable things that move around, but then we also have our virtual innovation areas where they're having them. And then we have also got partners now that have started their own versions of these that we're kind of connecting with them and saying, what are you guys learning? What are we learning? And the idea about it, I think one of the interesting questions, we had a great, talking to Fortune 50 organization, one that came to us and said, we want to know whether to invest in gamification. Is the gamification good or not? And so we said, well, okay, let's try a test and learn it. What we did is we set up a couple of well-known gamification platform, 2 providers. We had a control group. We ran a 10 or 12-week campaign, and the idea is, based on the ability to gather data. That's great about these platforms is you get data. And so we started to be able to answer, it's not, is gamification good or bad? The question is it good for you? Is it worth the investment for you? And, what we showed them is that, yes, people that participated did learn more. They did retain more. We stopped just short of being able to show were they actually able to move more product or not. I mean, that was just on the other edge of collecting data. But the idea was coming back and saying, okay, so if you think of that you have 100,000 salespeople out there, is it worth, $10 to $20 per user investment? You look at $1 million. Are you okay with that return on that investment for that $1 million as you're going to roll that out? And this all of a sudden then gave them more insights than just gamification, good, gamification, bad. It says, how can we best use our dollars to get the effect we want? They were happy to see that it could be, but they also felt that we probably have a couple other needs, so let's at this point, do that and do the gamification on some smaller scales at different points. And what they started to learn is it's better here for reinforcement, maybe not an initial campaign where we're just rolling out a new product. There was a lot of insights that came from that. But that's the basis behind the Innovation Kitchen is like, let's gather data, what works. And that was a partnership with them. We also had, obviously, the third-party platform partners that came in and are willing to say, let's sit down, let's have an out-of-the-box set experience, kind of set that up. And able to do that. And so that Innovation Kitchen is really a place that's trying to be sustainable within GP to bring new ideas in and allow customers the opportunity. We also, in a lot of the platforms we invest in, so we have people can come in and try them out in low-risk environments.
Got it. That's pretty cool, and I think it mirrors a shift in how selling happens. Certainly in the software industry, it used to be, here's my product, sign on the dotted line and go figure out how to deploy it, to more of a kind of discussion. Like, we have business requirements we're trying to fulfill. You have some technology. Let's figure out together how it might work. I really love the idea. In Microsoft, we called it the garage, right? And but I love this concept of the Innovation Kitchen. It'd be great. I'd love to hang out there and cook up some omelets one day.
And I will tell you that, I am just absolutely amazed in the work where I've had the opportunity to see the Microsoft work that you guys, you've really, changed the business, the way you look at it. And I'm going to tell you, being there on campus during the hackathon is just, simultaneously, I am excited and feel really old and really slow.
It's an epic. I tell that story about how Satya killed the traditional company meeting and turned it into this worldwide hackathon. It's the most amazing story, great things come out of it.
The energy, and I think that's the thing, is where we used to be afraid to ask for feedback. And I think the question is in our traditional learning practices that when I start to feel that I don't want to collect feedback, or I start to feel like, let's capture or control it, I go, that's where you got to check that. Yeah. We need to open up the ecosystem, bring our the people that benefit from our systems into the process. Welcome. How can I make this better? Because we're not instructional psychics.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And we set this bad paradigm up of bring me a rock. And it's like, is this rock going to work? Let's stop the madness and start a new process.
Very cool. So 2 last questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, who do you like in the space? Whose ideas resonate with you, or do you find yourself following? Are there people you could introduce us to that we don't know?
Oh, wow. Goodness. Well, actually, so let's see. So I'll start off with one of them. I like Will Tolheimer. We talked briefly about that, I know. But what I like about Will is I kind of call him a learning curmudgeon, but his blog, Will It Work?
Yeah.
He really is what I would say a research base, and his goal is to bring the research to the people, make it more accessible, better understand, how a study is conducted. What does it tell us about this? How do we, differentiate? So when we think about the infamous Ebbinghaus, so we see the results, but the question is, do you know what the construct of the study was? What were they actually retaining for, what were they measuring? How do we know about that? Because that helps inform us how we use it. So that's his mission. And I call him a learning curmudgeon because he's always poking holes in some of that. So he's definitely one. One of my favorite books is the Checklist Manifesto.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, the storytelling and the approach, it just comes through the concept of, where you're really looking at just taking a step back, the simple tool, the elegance of the checklist, and that it's not for the novice to make them an expert. It's to make an expert have expert application.
Yeah.
And it's just, and he's not a designer he's not an instructional designer by trade.
He's a surgeon, right?
Yes. And his whole background, and he looked at the construction industry. So I just reread, I went back for the first couple of stories again, because it was just refreshing. And I think that goes back into why we open our ecosystem to new perspectives.
Yeah.
He has some really fresh things that resonate with me. So anyway, those are probably two, if you haven't shared those.
That's great. One last question.
Yeah.
What I find a lot of people do this kind of work because they have a personal mission. Was there somebody or something in your history that drove you to do this line of work, or did you fall into it by accident?
No, actually, I think, I come from a family of teachers, and so I naturally went through. But I would also say that in my own personal learning journey, I was often frustrated. And so I would go through school, and I was very curious, and I would think about things in different directions, and then I would ask a lot of questions, and I'd feel that, not rightly or wrongly with the teachers, but they only knew one way to explain it, which was aligned to the textbook. And when I would start to think about things differently or push outside the box, I was constantly pushed back into this line up, sit down, be quiet till we do this. And I was railing against the system of saying, if I've got challenges or difficulties in trying to learn a different way, I got what they were saying, but I wanted to push, and they couldn't explore it. So there's got to be other people. So that kind of was an internal drive to get into this. I was going to go teach, and I love teachers, and we need more of them. We should pay them $1 million each, because I'm telling you, I did my student teaching, and I'm like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I just don't have. I'm a weak person. I got to find a better personal alignment for me. So that's how I got into this. So I came out of that, and I said, I heard about this instructional design program at Indiana University. I just finished my undergrad, and I was going to be a teacher. And I'm like, let's take a look at this. And I got into that, and ever since then, it has just. I picked up with Unext.com, which was I call the Xerox Park of Learning, and all that. That was a great research-based place. Love that, and I've just been blessed in my journey. So I'm passionate about it. I bore people at cocktail parties, so
Great. Well, you didn't bore us today. Thanks, Matt, for joining us in the conversation and for everything you and GB Strategies do. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I thought the future would be cooler. I thought the future would be cooler.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of Learning is the New Working. As always, it's customary at the end of podcasts to ask you to consider going to your podcast platform of choice, be it iTunes or Spotify or Spreaker or Google Play. We don't discriminate. We're everywhere. But go to your platform of choice and give us a rating and give us some feedback. It helps other people find us, and it helps broaden the conversation. If you have ideas about other guests or topics we could cover on the podcast, we're very open to hearing from you. You can go to www.learningfuturesgroup.com, sign up for our newsletter, or leave us a message and give us some feedback. Thanks again for listening to this podcast.
I thought the future would be cooler.